You see, God is going to do a work of separation, and He is going to do it. He is. In the life of every one of His people, as we're going to see here in a moment, He says, I will cleanse you from all your filthiness and all your idols. The moment God begins to work in a person's life, He begins separating them. But, listen to me, separating them, not just from a wicked world, but separating them to Himself. There are many men in the name of religion who have separated themselves from all manner of vile things, and yet they are lost, lost, lost. Because it is not just a question of do you hate that which defiles and that which is wicked. You can do that for pride's sake. But do you love Him? Let me share with you something about holiness. You want to really mess up somebody, really bad, a guy who's preaching on holiness. You want to mess him up. Say, what is your definition of holiness? And for the most part, most men will say, God is without sin, God is pure, there is no evil in Him, there is no darkness. And then go, okay, thank you, that's your definition of holiness. Yes, okay, what's your definition of righteousness? God is without sin, God is holy, God is pure. Well, which is it? Do you realize how much we confuse those two ideas? I would submit to you that holiness does not mean primarily that God is morally pure, or that God is light, or that God is without sin. Holiness means that God is unique, that there is none like the Lord. There is none like Him. He is totally and completely separate. I always ask young people, I say, well, what's more like God? An archangel in the presence of God, worshiping Him in glory and power, or bacteria floating around your toilet? And they'll always say, well, an angel. I say, no, neither. An archangel in heaven is no more closer to God than bacteria floating around in your toilet, because there's none like the Lord. He is not like us, just bigger. He's not like us at all. It is not quantitatively larger. It is qualitatively different. There's none like Him. His name. That is why I always get on to Englishmen who works with me. I say, oh, you English, you're always talking about God and country. That's blasphemy. God and king, blasphemy. You don't put God in a conjunctive relationship with anyone, unless it's the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And what does that have to do with separation? Absolutely everything. To be holy is not to be a little evangelical Pharisee who crosses every T and dots every I and makes inferences into laws and presses them on everyone else around you. Holiness is to be separated unto God, to be immersed in God, to be passionate about God, to be wild about God, to think about God, to be God besought, to be consumed by God. That is holiness. And everything else breaks forth from that. Because if there's any other foundation laid, it's not a proper one. You can do all sorts of things in the name of Christianity and be a million miles away from God and His will. And so this idea, again, of self-denial is not this person grudgingly doing right things in order to go to heaven. Sometimes I'll go out visiting with my pastor. And we'll go see somebody who hadn't been to church in months and months and months and knock on the door, and the person will receive us very, very well. Be very, very polite. Begin to speak with him about the things of God. And he's automatically drawn to the duties of church. And he says, you're right. I know I need to get back in church. How many of you have heard that before? I need to get back in church, and, well, you know, I need to get my kids in Sunday school, and, yeah, I need to read my Bible, and I need to... He's lost. He needs to take... God is nothing but bad medicine to him that he takes only not to die. If I go home tonight and make it home, my wife's waiting up for me, and she's standing there at the door, and I walk in, and I just give her a big old kiss, and she says, well, what's all that about? And I pull out this, I say, well, on page 32 of the Manual of Good Husbands, it says, she will feed me that book page by page. She doesn't want that. She wants my heart. When we talk about self-denial, I have never met a missionary, never in my life, worth his salt, that's given up almost everything that even thought about it. They never even thought about it. If you were to start talking to them about it, they get uncomfortable and try to change the situation because they can't think of anything they've given up. Why? They're so mesmerized by God. This is not about giving up stuff. It's about looking at Him and following Him. Now, I want us to go on. He says in verse 25, and I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. Look at that. Now, let me just stop here. This is not something that is some sort of an evangelical second blessing upon spiritual Christians. This is upon everyone called by His name, everyone born in Zion, every child of God. This will be a reality in their life, at least to some noticeable degree, or they are not a child of God. Let me stop here. I'm going to get mad now. I am so sick and tired of hearing people say, and everything that's been said here so far I agree with. I just want you to understand the context, and I want you to understand this. I am so tired of people saying, there's just as much immorality in the church as there is outside of the church. There's just as much divorce in the church as outside of the church. There's just as much homosexuality and lying and hating and everything else in the church as outside of the church. That is a damnable lie. The Church of Jesus Christ in the United States of America, although she is not perfect, she is broken, she is humble, and she's following her master. The problem is many of you guys don't even know what the church is. This is not like Israel, where there was this nation state called forth, and then this small group, this small remnant of regenerated people. You forget we're Baptists. It's a regenerate church. It's a converted church. I heard a speaker stand up, a great, well-known at least, I don't agree with his form of apologetics, but he stood up, a big apologist, and he stood up and goes, we've got to do something. We've got to do something because 75% of the Christian youth in America do not believe that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is important. And I said, sir, if they don't believe the resurrection's important, they're not Christian. It's like the deacon gets up in the middle of just some big carnal warfare in the church and says, we're Christians, we shouldn't be hating one another. If you're hating one another, you're not Christians. You see, we've got this idea, we just label everybody Christian, and then from then on, it's not about salvation, just the kind of rewards you get. That's not true. It's like you look at people and they interpret, the story of Jesus, the parable of Jesus about the two builders and the two foundation, rock and stone. You hear preachers say, now, if you're a Christian and you're building upon the rock and the storms of life come, you'll have a stable, good life because your life will be built upon the rock. And, well, if you're a Christian and you're not building your life upon the rock, then when the storms of life come, it's going to be hard for you. That's not what that teaches. What that teaches is this. If you're hearing His Word and obeying and building your life upon the rock, then when the storms of God's judgment come in the consummation of all things, you will stand. And if you are hearing His Word and not obeying it and building your life upon the rock, you will be damned. It's the same thing about all the calls to self-denial from Jesus Christ in the Gospels. We think that He's saying, okay, you become a Christian, and then some of you are going to surrender to these calls. No, that's not what He's saying. He says, if any man come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, the thing we have to understand is that self-denial and that cross and that following Him takes up many, many manifestations. In some people's lives, it is greatly manifested what they are doing. They may die as martyrs or serve on the mission field and not return to their own country for 40 years like Amy Carmichael. For some of us living in this culture, it's more difficult to determine just how our self-denial works itself out in the cross that we bear, but it will be nonetheless real. You see. And He says here, look at this. He says, I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean.